"I've got a spare room," the rancher told the green-skinned woman, and she nearly broke down. Crying Freya told the rancher to leave her because the fire would reach them before he could help. Jack Bennett ignored her. The 34-year-old human rancher ran through burning grass with a soaked coat wrapped around his arms. Freya towered over him, broad-shouldered and powerfully built, but an arrow wound beneath her ribs had left the green-skinned orc woman barely able to stand. Beyond the smoke, armed riders were already searching the road. Freya warned Jack that two were circling toward the creek before he could even hear them. That was his first clue that the wounded stranger was no helpless traveler. The second was the silver-crowned wolf crest hidden beneath her torn coat. Jack had little money, a nearly empty pantry, and a ranch the bank might soon take. Still, he told her he had a spare room. Freya stared at him as if those 5 words hurt more than the arrow. Then one rider shouted that they had found the High Chieftain's trail. Jack looked at Freya, and suddenly the woman gripping his hand was no ordinary fugitive. If stories about unlikely love, trust, and the bond between a human and an orc speak to you, subscribe to Orc Bond Saga and stay until the end. Jack did not have time to ask what High Chieftain meant. The riders were coming closer. Hooves struck the southern road beyond the smoke, while flames moved through the dry pasture with frightening speed. Cattle crowded against the stone trough. Burning grass curled into black fragments and flew over the fence. Freya lifted her head. Her breathing was ragged, but something inside her changed. Pain remained, weakness remained, fear remained. Yet the moment she listened to the approaching horses, she became precise. She told Jack there were 6 riders. Jack could hear perhaps 3. Freya waited. Then she corrected the formation. 4 remained on the road. 2 had separated toward the creek. She said the eastern riders would search the low ground first because injured people moved toward water and cover. Jack stared at her. A moment earlier she had nearly collapsed. Now she was explaining the movement of armed men he could barely locate through the smoke. Freya caught his sleeve and told him the riders would enter the barn from the front. Jack pointed toward the cattle aisle. They moved. The barn was already filled with smoke. Jack pushed past frightened cows and kicked open the narrow service door at the rear. Behind it ran an old irrigation ditch, mostly hidden by cottonwoods. Freya dropped into the ditch. Her knees nearly gave out. Jack caught her arm. For 1 second, the difference between them became impossible to ignore. Freya stood more than a head taller than him. Her deep green skin was darkened with soot. Thick black hair had partly escaped a long braid. Powerful shoulders filled the torn riding coat. Small white tusks curved from her lower jaw. Even injured, she looked as though she could have lifted Jack off the ground with one arm. Yet at that moment, her weight leaned against him because her body had simply reached its limit. Freya recovered immediately. Pride returned before balance did. Jack pretended not to notice. They crouched beneath the ditch bank. A rider entered the barn. Another passed near the creek. Freya closed her eyes briefly. She identified one horse from the uneven rhythm of its hind leg. Jack asked how she knew. Freya said that animal had followed her since dawn. No pride, no explanation, only fact. Jack began wondering what kind of woman could recognize a horse by sound while bleeding through her clothes. The riders moved past. Jack led Freya toward the house. The Bennett ranch sat in a shallow fold of land beside a narrow creek. 87 acres looked better in bank documents than they did in reality. The western pasture flooded every spring. The northern field produced enough grain to keep Jack hopeful and rarely enough to make him comfortable. 30 cattle remained after sickness had taken 9 during the previous winter. His father had once talked about adding another barn. Jack now spent most months hoping he could keep the barn he already had. The house was plain. The kitchen roof sagged slightly. One shutter had been replaced with mismatched boards. A porch support rested on stacked stones because the proper timber repair had been postponed twice. The pantry was small. The bank debt was not. Still, Jack kept the place clean. A vegetable garden grew behind the kitchen. Onions dried beneath the eaves. Tools hung neatly beside the barn. Broken things were repaired before new things were purchased. That had become the rule of his life. Jack brought Freya through the rear door and kept the stove cold so no smoke would rise from the chimney. They waited. 2 riders moved along the creek. Freya stood behind Jack with one hand pressed against her side. The other held a long, silver-handled knife. Jack noticed the crowned wolf carved into its pommel. The same symbol rested on the clasp at Freya's throat. One rider stopped. Freya leaned closer. She said he was listening. Jack asked how she knew. Freya explained that a searching rider kept moving his horse. A listening rider stopped both himself and the animal. Jack said nothing. The horse moved again. Freya had been right. When the final rider disappeared north, Jack turned. Blood had reached Freya's belt. He told her the wound could not wait. Freya said she could manage. Then she took one step and nearly fell. Jack did not argue. He simply pointed toward the spare room. The larger bedroom had remained mostly closed for 7 years. A rope bed stood beside the wall. A wool blanket covered it. A wash basin sat below a narrow shelf. Nothing more. Freya stopped at the doorway. Jack misunderstood her expression. He assumed she was disappointed. He explained that the room was plain but dry. The rear window could not be seen from the road. The blanket was clean. Freya did not answer. Her amber eyes moved over the bed, the basin, the little shelf, then back to Jack. For a brief moment, her fierce face looked dangerously close to breaking. She asked what the room cost. Jack frowned. Freya repeated the question. What did he expect in return for allowing her to remain? Jack looked at the blood staining her clothing. He told her the only thing he expected was that she try not to ruin his spare blanket because winter was coming, and he could not afford another. Freya stared at him. Jack wondered whether orcs understood dry humor. Then one corner of her mouth moved. Barely. She stepped into the room. Jack turned toward the kitchen. Behind him came the click of the window latch. Then the bed shifted slightly. Jack glanced back. Freya was checking the window, the wall, the space beneath the bed, the distance between bed and door. She was measuring escape. Jack pretended he had not seen. He heated water. When he returned, Freya had removed the burned riding coat. The shirt beneath was dark grey, torn and dirty, but the fabric was far finer than anything Jack owned. Silver stitching reinforced the collar. The wolf clasp remained at her throat. Her knife rested within reach. Jack asked permission before examining the wound. Freya looked surprised. Then she nodded. When she lifted the damaged shirt, Jack turned his face away. Freya asked why. Jack explained that humans generally gave another person privacy while they removed clothing. Freya seemed genuinely confused. Among her people, she explained, a person who had accepted responsibility for an injured companion was expected to inspect the injury directly. Looking away might imply disgust or refusal of duty. Jack looked back. He said humans had apparently worked much harder at making embarrassment complicated. Freya almost smiled again. The arrow had passed beneath her ribs. The shaft was gone. The point had torn flesh rather than entering deeply, but dirt had worked into the injury. Jack washed his hands. He was no doctor. Ranching simply punished uselessness. He had stitched cattle after wire cuts, splintered a calf's leg, reset his own finger against a fence post. Once he had spent half a night helping a cow survive a difficult birth because the nearest animal doctor could not cross a flooded road. Still, Freya was not livestock, so Jack moved slowly. Every time her body tightened, he stopped. Every time she told him to continue, he did. Freya watched his hands. Rough fingers, scarred knuckles, a crooked thumbnail from an old hammer strike, hands built by work instead of weapons. He cleaned the wound, wrapped it, then treated the burn along her forearm. When he finished, Freya looked at the bandage as if being cared for was something more difficult than being injured. Jack brought food, beans, bread, a strip of dried beef. Freya looked at the plate, then toward the cupboard. Jack knew what she saw: very little flour, 2 onions, a little salt, enough meat for several careful meals. She asked whether Jack had eaten. He told her he would later. Freya split the beef. She pushed half toward him. Jack refused. She pushed it again. Her expression turned the gesture into an order. Jack ate. Only then did Freya begin. She tried to eat slowly. Hunger defeated her. Jack looked away. That night he asked her name. She hesitated, only briefly. Freya. Nothing else. Jack gave his own, Jack Bennett, 34 rancher. Freya repeated it carefully. Then she asked why he had helped her. Jack had no impressive answer. Someone had been hurt. He had been there. That was enough. Freya looked at him as though he had answered the wrong question. Night came. Jack slept on the kitchen floor. His old rifle rested beside him. He did not lock Freya's door. He did not block the hallway. Near midnight, she opened it. Jack was asleep against the wall with the rifle angled toward the front entrance. Not toward her. Freya remained there for several seconds, then she closed the door quietly. Before lying down, she inspected the bread Jack had left. She broke it apart. Smell it. Checked the water. Old habits. Years earlier, poison had reached her through a cup poured by someone she knew. Another attempt had come through her horse's feed. Trust was not something Freya could simply choose, because Jack seemed kind. Before dawn, Jack heard the bed frame strike the wall. Then, a name. Matilda. Jack reached the doorway. Freya sat upright with her knife raised. Her breathing came quickly. For the first time, he saw fear without pride covering it. Jack remained outside. He did not ask about the nightmare. He told her morning was coming and asked whether she wanted coffee. Freya lowered the blade. The coffee was weak. She drank it anyway. When she stood too quickly, her knees almost failed. Jack caught her elbow. Freya pulled away immediately. Jack raised both hands and told her he would never spread the story that an orc warrior had nearly been defeated by a wooden chair. She stared at him, then smiled barely. The expression disappeared almost immediately. Jack carried it with him for the rest of the day. By midday, smoke still hung over the valley. Jack repaired burned fencing. Freya stood near the rear window and watched the road. When Jack returned, she asked where the southern track led. He said Bellcross. She asked where it crossed the creek. He explained. Then she asked whether another cattle path joined farther east. Jack looked at her. There was one, barely wide enough for a wagon. Freya said the riders would place a watcher there before sunset. Jack asked why. She said that if she commanded the search, that was where she would put him. Jack checked after lunch. A fresh horse print marked the cattle path. Freya had been right. He returned with a different question. She was not merely familiar with being hunted. She understood how hunters thought. Jack asked whether she had been a soldier. Freya said she had trained among soldiers. True, incomplete. Jack let it remain. Over. The next 2 days, the search continued around them without becoming visible. A print near the creek, a broken reed. One stone in the lower fence moved and was replaced badly. Freya noticed things Jack missed. Jack noticed things only someone who knew the ranch could notice. Together, they saw more. That surprised both of them. The pressure never vanished. Neither did the quiet moments. Freya discovered human furniture had apparently been built for much smaller bodies. Her knees barely fit beneath Jack's table. He offered her the chair nearest the fire. She asked why he kept treating her as the weakest person in the house. Jack stared. He explained that humans offered the warmest seat to guests, Freya said among orcs. Placing someone in the safest position could suggest doubt about their ability. Jack asked whether orcs therefore showed affection by making loved ones sit beside open doors and dangerous objects. Freya laughed, a real laugh, deep, warm, unexpectedly. Jack dropped the spoon in his hand. That made her laugh harder. For several seconds the house felt different, alive. Then Jack glanced through the window. One wooden marker in the lower pasture stood at the wrong angle. His smile disappeared. Freya noticed immediately. They went outside. Mud around the marker showed where someone had pulled it free and placed it back. Nothing stolen, nothing damaged. The act was more disturbing because it had been deliberate. Someone wanted to know whether Jack noticed. He did. Freya said she should leave. Jack asked where she would go. She did not know. Anywhere away from him. Jack told her leaving immediately was exactly what the Watcher wanted. Freya argued that remaining endangered him. Jack said danger had already opened his gates. He asked who was hunting her. Freya's face closed. She said the matter belonged to her people. Jack walked into the spare room to retrieve linen. A leather packet slipped from beneath Freya's coat. It struck the floor. 2 metal tokens slid out. Both carried the crowned wolf crest, A folded page bore the same seal. Jack did not pick anything up. Freya moved between him and the packet. Too quickly, too protective. Jack asked what she had brought into his house. Freya said the objects themselves were not dangerous. Jack looked toward the pasture. The people touching his fences suggested otherwise. Freya said anyone who knew too much could become part of her conflict. Something hardened inside Jack. He asked whether feeding her, hiding her, and sleeping 10 feet away had somehow kept him outside that conflict. Freya said she had tried to protect him. Jack asked from what? The truth. Her pride rose immediately. Among her people, information was shared only where necessary. Jack answered that this was not her command camp. It was his home. He had hidden her, cleaned an arrow wound, fed her with food he could barely replace. Someone was now watching his land. She had trusted him enough to sleep beneath his roof, but not enough to tell him what danger had followed her through the door. Freya's voice became colder. Jack did not understand what she was trying to prevent. Jack replied that she had made sure of that. The sentence hurt. Freya turned away. Then she said, everyone who learned what she was eventually wanted something from her. Jack noticed the wording. What she was, not who. He asked what she meant. Freya closed herself again. Jack saw it happen. He told her he did not need every secret. He needed enough truth to decide what risks were his. Freya said decisions like that had killed people. Jack asked whose decisions. No answer came. They stopped before anger became cruelty. That night Jack slept in his own room. Freya remained in the spare room. The kitchen between them felt larger than the house. Morning brought no apology. Jack made coffee. Freya repaired a saddle strap. They barely spoke. Then Jack went to inspect the ridge. Freya stood to follow. He said she did not have to. One look ended that argument. They found buried ashes beneath a stone overhang, dried meat wrapping, a flattened patch where someone had been sitting. The view covered Jack's entire ranch. Someone had watched for hours. Freya crouched. Jack asked again who wanted her. This time she gave him something. The man at the center of the hunt did not hate her. Jack found that hard to understand. Then why would he want her dead? Freya looked toward the valley. Because Walter believed he was saving everyone else. Jack asked who Walter was. Freya said he was old, powerful, terrified of another war. He believed certain sacrifices became acceptable if enough lives stood on the other side. Jack asked whether Freya was one of those sacrifices. She did not answer. She did not need to. They walked home. Near the lower field, Jack slipped on wet stone. Freya caught his arm. Her fingers remained there after he regained balance. Neither mentioned the argument. Neither apologized. But the distance narrowed. That afternoon, Freya told him about Matilda. Not everything. Enough. Matilda had trained her from childhood. She taught Freya to ride before many children learned to read. She taught her to fight while exhausted, because real danger rarely waited for comfort. She taught her that strength without judgment was only a more dangerous form of stupidity. Jack said he would have liked Matilda. Freya almost smiled, then explained that Matilda had died 6 months earlier. She discovered someone was manipulating patrol reports and allowing border raids to continue. Matilda believed the danger came from people claiming they were protecting the clans. She died before presenting everything she knew. Freya reached her too late. Jack understood then. The food inspections, the doors, the knife, the inability to believe in generosity without asking what followed. Jack sat beside her. After a long silence, he told her about Peter. Peter had been Jack's younger brother. 19, restless, funny. Certain he would leave the ranch one day and see the ocean. He never did. Warm rain melted mountain snow too quickly one spring. The creek rose. Peter went out to clear branches from the footbridge. The railing broke. Jack remembered running, remembering Peter reaching. Mud beneath his fingernails, their fingertips touch, then the current taking him. For years, Jack had believed 1 more inch might have changed everything. Freya listened. When he finished, she explained an Orc custom. The dead were sometimes remembered by naming the strength they left inside those who survived. Jack asked what Peter had left him. Freya looked toward the creek. Then she told Jack that Peter had left him unable to ignore another reaching hand. Jack looked down. For 7 years he had called that feeling guilt. Freya made it sound like inheritance. Something inside him changed. That evening they ate beside the stove. Jack stood to fetch water. When he returned, Freya was eating from his bowl. She froze. Jack stopped. For days she had inspected every cup and every piece of bread. Now she had eaten from his food without thinking. Freya slowly pushed the bowl toward him. Jack said nothing. He did not need to. The next morning, the knife remained on the shelf while Freya slept. Close but not held. Trust had begun appearing in small absences. Freya started helping around the ranch, sorting harness, shelling beans, holding boards while Jack repaired the porch. Then he found her lifting a fence post. Jack told her to put it down. Freya reminded him she was stronger. Jack reminded her strength did not prevent an arrow wound from reopening. Freya said if he wanted obedience, he should buy a dog. Jack said he could not afford one. She laughed. Jack had begun waiting for that sound. That frightened him. One evening Freya taught him an orc word, Korra. Jack repeated it badly. She corrected him. He repeated it worse. Freya accused him of doing it deliberately. He denied everything. Then she explained the meaning. Korra meant hearth. Not merely fire. It meant the people around the fire whom a person had chosen to protect. Not only blood. Choice. Jack repeated it correctly. Freya looked surprised. He had been practicing while working outside. Rain settled over the valley several days later. Jack sat near the stove repairing the harness. Freya occupied the chair opposite. Her hair was loose because the braid had become wet. Thick black strands fell over one shoulder. Jack looked once, then again, Freya noticed. She asked whether loose hair violated another human custom. Jack said no. She asked why he was staring. Jack became deeply interested in the harness. That amused her. Rain struck harder. Freya said that if she disappeared before morning, Jack was not to follow. His hands stopped. He asked whether she planned to disappear. No. She was preparing for what might happen. Jack told her that asking him not to follow was not the same as asking him not to care. The room became quiet. Freya asked why he cared. The answer should have been simple. Because she was wounded. Because anyone deserved help. Those answers had once been enough. They were not anymore. Jack admitted he no longer knew where simple kindness had ended. Freya rose. She crossed the room. Standing close, she seemed even taller. Jack lifted his face to meet her eyes. Freya raised one hand. Her fingers touched his cheek, carefully. The first touch between them had nothing to do with wounds or danger. Jack's breathing changed. Freya did too. She asked what humans did when they wanted to say something important, but were afraid to say it. Jack told her humans usually ruined the moment by talking too much. Freya almost smiled. She leaned closer. A boot struck the porch. Both froze. Freya's knife appeared in her hand. Jack reached for the rifle. Another slow step. The latch moved once. Whoever stood outside knew the door was unlocked. They did not enter. The shadow beneath the door remained, then vanished. Jack waited. 5 minutes. 10. He finally opened the door. Rain, empty pasture. No person. A strip of black cloth lay on the porch. It had been pinned beneath Jack's own fencing knife. Freya recognized the material. Walter. The name destroyed what remained of the quiet. He knew exactly where she was. At dawn, Jack found the lower cattle gate open. One cow was missing. Another stood nearby. Someone had moved the herd during the night. Jack followed tracks to the road. Nothing. He calculated the loss. One cow represented winter feed, a bank payment, repairs. Freya saw the calculation. For the first time she could count what sheltering her had cost. Burned pasture, damaged fence, lost animal, men watching Jack's home. She told him she would replace everything. Jack looked at her. Freya corrected herself. Not payment. Restitution for damage caused by the people hunting her. Jack accepted the difference. He told her they could discuss money when both knew they would survive the week. 2 days later, Freya went scouting alone. She told herself she would return within an hour. She did not tell Jack. That was the mistake. At noon, he noticed her boots gone. The bay mare was missing. At sunset, Freya had not returned. Jack told himself she was capable, far more capable than he was. She understood tracking, combat, pursuit. He told himself he was being foolish. Then darkness arrived. Logic stopped helping. Jack took his rifle and followed the northern trail. Rain began. Tracks became difficult. Near the ridge he found blood. Only a little. Enough. His stomach turned cold. He followed through the trees. A branch snapped. Jack raised the rifle. Freya stepped out of the darkness. Wet mud covered, alive. Relief hit so violently that it became anger. Jack demanded to know where she had been. Freya stared. Jack told her he had found blood. She looked at the shallow cut on her forearm. Only then did she understand. He had thought she was dead. His anger had nothing to do with control. Freya admitted she should have told him. Jack said yes, she should have. Rain ran from his hair. Freya stepped closer. She placed one hand against the center of his chest. An orc gesture. Acknowledgement of fear, shared and survived. Jack covered her hand with his. A human answer. For several seconds neither moved. Then they walked home. For the first time since the fire, Jack slept, believing perhaps the worst danger had passed. At sunrise, 12 riders came for Freya. White wolf banners moved across the lower pasture. Jack grabbed his rifle. Freya stepped outside. The riders stopped before the porch. One by one they dismounted. Then all 12 dropped to one knee. Jack lowered the rifle. The oldest warrior removed her helmet. A scar crossed her green face from temple to jaw. She pressed one fist against her chest. Then she addressed Freya as High Chieftain of the Crowned Wolf, Keeper of Vargan Reach, first voice of the 9 clans. Jack heard every word. His mind rejected them. High Chieftain, 9 clans. He looked at Freya. Everything changed in meaning. Fine cloth, silver knife, the wolf clasp, her knowledge of patrols, the authority in her voice, her suspicion of gifts, the way she had spoken about command without ever admitting she possessed it. A ruler had slept in Peter's spare room. A ruler had eaten beans from Jack's bowl. A ruler had almost kissed him beside his stove. Then came the colder truth. Walter had not simply discovered Freya's hiding place, he had discovered Jack. The scarred commander introduced herself as Bridget. She had served Freya's household for 17 years. Jack barely heard. He went inside. Freya followed. He asked whether Freya was even her real name. She said it was. That hurt more than a false name might have. Jack asked how much else had been real. Freya said Matilda was real. The fear was real. Walter was real. Everything she had told him was true. Jack said truth given in pieces could still become deception when the missing pieces decided whether someone lived or died. Freya told him revealing her title would have increased his danger. Jack looked toward the burned pasture. Greater than fire, greater than men at his window, greater than stolen cattle. Freya said most humans would have acted differently if they knew what she was. Jack asked why she had never given him the chance not to. She trusted him enough to clean an arrow wound, enough to hear about Matilda, enough to touch his face, but not enough to decide for himself whether a High Chieftain could remain under his roof. Freya said rank changed people. Jack answered that she had still made the decision for him. The argument might have become worse. Bridget entered. The danger was larger than either of them. Walter was one of the oldest surviving elders of the Crowned Wolf Council. He had lived through a clan war 30 years earlier. 2 brothers died. His only son died. Walter spent the rest of his life building alliances meant to prevent another war. Freya's refusal to marry Tristan, an orc war leader from a powerful neighboring clan, threatened one of those alliances. At first, Walter used political pressure. Then Matilda discovered he had quietly allowed border raids to continue because frightened clans became easier to unite. He did not create every attack. He allowed some danger to remain useful. Matilda gathered proof. She died before presenting it. Freya began investigating. Walter concluded that one ruler's death might prevent thousands of graves. Jack understood why Freya said Walter did not hate her. He believed he was saving people. That made him worse. Bridget said Tristan had rejected Walter when he learned the truth. He was gathering loyal riders. They needed to leave, immediately. Freya agreed. Jack said nothing. He watched the spare room become empty. The blanket folded. The cup disappeared. Freya took the ribbon from the bedpost. Jack wished he had asked why she kept it there. She entered the kitchen wearing her repaired coat. Freya placed the silver knife on the table. It was worth more than Jack's cattle. She offered it for the damage. Jack pushed it back. Freya insisted. Jack said restitution could be discussed after the crisis. The knife was not payment for a room that had never had a price. Freya stared at him. Jack wanted to say he was still angry. He wanted to ask her to stay. Both truths existed. A rifle cracked outside. Bridget shouted. One crowned wolf guard fell. Then the hay shed caught fire. Walter's men had arrived. Jack dragged Freya behind the stone trough. A second shot struck the barn wall. Freya grabbed his shirt and told him to stay down. Jack looked toward the irrigation gates. He could not outfight trained riders. He could not command soldiers. But he knew the ranch. Every slope, every ditch, every gate. Every place where water would move if released. Jack crawled toward the holding pond. 3 wooden gates controlled the channels. Normally one opened at a time. Jack opened all 3. Water rushed through dry trenches. Mounted attackers entered from the east. The first horse hit sudden mud and stumbled. The second turned. Formation broke. Freya understood instantly. She ordered Bridget's warriors toward the creek. Jack opened the cattle pens. Frightened animals surged across the western field. 2 riflemen lost their view. Freya crossed behind the herd and pulled a wounded guard to cover. Jack watched her for 1 second too long. This was not a woman pretending to be powerful. She knew exactly where she belonged inside danger. A mercenary entered the barn. Jack struck his wrist with a shovel handle. The gun fell. The man punched Jack into a stall. Before the second blow landed, Freya stepped through smoke. The mercenary looked upward. His decision to surrender came quickly. Then fire reached the barn roof. A beam cracked. Jack looked up. Freya stood beneath it. The opening flashed through his mind. Smoke. Freya on one knee, his coat around her. Jack ran. He hit her shoulder. Freya moved clear. Jack did not. The burning beam struck his back and left shoulder. Pain erased everything. He hit the floor. His lungs refused to work. Freya turned. For 1 terrible second she looked exactly as Jack must have looked when he found her beside the burning fence. She crossed the barn, lifted the beam. Burning wood tore her palms. She kept lifting. Jack rolled free. His left arm would not move properly. Each breath stabbed his ribs. Freya tore a strip from the white ceremonial cloak Bridget had brought for her return. She wrapped it around Jack's shoulder to protect the wound. Then she lifted him. Jack protested weakly. Freya ignored him. At the beginning, Jack had wrapped his coat around her and guided her through flames. Now the High Chieftain carried him through smoke. Outside, more riders arrived. At their head was Tristan. He was enormous, even by Orc standards. Grey-green skin, old battle scars, calm eyes, plain armor made from expensive steel. Walter's remaining men broke formation. The attack ended quickly after that. Jack remembered fragments. Rain is beginning. Freya's hand against his face. Bridget cut away his shirt, Tristan shouting orders. Then darkness. When Jack woke, he was in the spare room. Pain arrived first. Freya second. She sat beside the bed wearing a simple dark tunic. Her palms were bandaged. The silver clasp and armor were gone. Jack tried to rise. Pain stopped him. Freya placed one hand gently against his chest. Jack told her the room was hers. Freya answered that the room belonged to whoever needed it. That sentence stayed with him. The healer returned. 2 cracked ribs, a badly bruised shoulder, a deep cut across his back. Nothing permanently broken. Jack would recover if he avoided heavy work for several weeks. That last part bothered him most. Heavy work was his life. He asked about the fence. Freya told him no. He asked about cattle. No. The barn. No. Jack said repeating the same word did not qualify as ranch management. Freya said it had worked extremely well so far. Bridget entered with another problem. The Crowned Wolf Council expected Freya back within 3 days. If she remained absent longer, Walter's allies could formally challenge her fitness to govern during the crisis. 3 days. The number changed everything. Freya stayed. But now every quiet moment had an ending. On the first morning, Jack tried to dress himself. His left arm refused to lift. He cursed under his breath. Freya entered carrying breakfast. She saw him struggling with his shirt. Jack insisted he could manage. Freya put the tray down. He tried again. Pain crossed his face. Freya waited. Jack hated the silence. Finally he lowered his arm. Freya helped. She guided his injured arm through the sleeve, pulled the shirt carefully over his shoulder, fastened the front because Jack could not manage both hands. The task exposed something Jack had spent his life avoiding: dependence. He had always been useful to his father, useful to Peter, useful to the ranch, useful whenever a neighbor needed a roof repaired or an animal pulled from mud. Now he could not even dress himself properly. Jack said he felt useless. Freya sat beside him. She reminded him that days earlier he had turned irrigation ditches into a weapon and saved trained warriors. Jack said that was before. Now he could not button a shirt. Freya told him that when she first woke in the spare room, needing water humiliated her more than the arrow. She believed dependence meant weakness. Jack had not treated it that way, he simply helped. Now she expected the same courtesy. Jack looked at her. She had taken his lesson and returned it. He let her finish. Later that morning he found Freya carrying feed. Jack walked onto the porch. She looked up. He asked what she was doing. Freya said cattle apparently remained committed to eating despite political crises. Jack said the ranch was his responsibility. Freya set the sack down. She told him help did not make the ranch less his, any more than using his spare room made her less herself. Jack had no answer. By the second day he mostly stopped trying to carry things. Mostly. Freya caught him dragging a water bucket and threatened to assign Bridget 2 guards whose only responsibility would be preventing him from being foolish. Jack surrendered. That afternoon Freya brought bread. She reached into Jack's bowl and took a piece without thinking. Jack looked at her. Freya looked at the bread. She understood. Weeks earlier, she had inspected everything for poison. Now she stole food directly from his bowl. Jack smiled. Freya told him not to make it significant. He made it significant anyway. On the second night, rain struck the window. Jack woke and found Freya sitting beside it. Without armor, rank, or guards around her, she looked tired. Jack asked what troubled her. Freya admitted she had thought he was dead beneath the beam. Jack told her he had thought the same when he first saw her beside the fire. Freya said the idea of returning to Vargan Reach without him had become unbearable. Jack reached toward her. Freya took his hand. No knife in the other. No locked door, no cost, only trust. Freya asked what Jack would do if she asked him to come with her one day. He did not answer immediately. He imagined enormous orc halls, warriors kneeling, a court where everyone understood rules he did not. He told Freya he did not know whether he could belong in a world where everyone bowed to the woman he cared about. Freya asked whether he needed them to bow to him too. Jack said absolutely not. That made her smile. Then he admitted the deeper fear. What happened when Freya returned to people who matched her life? Warriors, leaders, people who understood her world without asking. Would a poor rancher still matter after the emergency ended? Freya told him he had mattered before he even knew her name. That should have been enough. For the moment it was. On the third morning Tristan arrived. Jack understood immediately why a council would have wanted him beside Freya. He was powerful, experienced orc. He knew the customs. He had ridden with Freya's father. He understood every title Jack barely remembered. Tristan thanked Jack for protecting Freya. Jack said Freya had protected him just as much. Tristan accepted the correction. That made disliking him difficult. Later, Tristan spoke privately with Freya near the creek. Jack watched from the window. They looked natural together. Same height, same world, same history. Jack hated how much that bothered him. When Freya returned, he became unusually interested in a cup. She asked whether the cup had offended him. Jack blamed his ribs. Freya told him his face was a terrible liar. Then she explained that Tristan had formally withdrawn any political marriage claim. Jack looked up too quickly. Freya raised an eyebrow. He asked whether he was supposed to care. She said apparently not. His ears warmed. Freya smiled. Then Bridget appeared. 3 days were over. Freya had to leave. At sunrise, Jack stood on the porch with his arm supported. Freya offered her forearm. He clasped it. Then she took his hand the human way. Jack said she was learning. Freya warned him not to become arrogant. He wanted to ask her to stay. She wanted him to ask, neither did. Duty was not a villain. It could not simply be defeated. Freya mounted. Jack watched until the banners disappeared. The spare room became empty again. This time he left the door open. For several days the injury consumed him. He could not lift feed properly, could barely repair the fence. Neighbors arrived after hearing about the attack. Some helped. Others mainly wanted the story. One man asked whether... Jack regretted helping an orc after seeing the damage. Jack looked toward the burned barn, the missing cattle, the repaired field, then toward the open spare room door. He said no. Not once. The answer surprised him by how true it felt. At Vargan Reach, Freya returned to stone walls and a council already tearing itself apart. Walter had escaped the ranch attack. Several allies denied knowing his plans. Others insisted Freya's disappearance proved the instability Walter had warned about. Freya sat through hours of accusation. Nobody asked whether her wound still hurt. Nobody brought terrible coffee. Nobody argued with her about furniture. She missed Jack with a physical ache. Bridget noticed. She said nothing. On the second day, riders found Walter near the Eastern Pass. On the third, he was brought to the council in chains. Walter did not kneel. Freya did not ask him to. She asked whether he ordered Matilda's death. Walter answered yes. No excuse, no denial. The truth landed harder. He explained that Matilda discovered operations Walter believed necessary to prevent another clan war. Freya called them manufactured danger. Walter described villages burned during the old conflict. Children starving after supply roads failed. His brothers are dying. His son died before 20. He had promised never again. Freya asked how murdering Matilda honored that promise. Walter said history cared less about clean hands than surviving people. Freya felt rage, then remembered Jack beneath the beam, the temptation to answer fear with force. She ordered Walter held for formal trial. Some elders protested. Freya demanded records. Patrol logs witnesses, numbers. Jack would have asked whether the measurements matched. The thought almost made her smile. The records revealed something important. Several human-orc border attacks Walter used to justify his plans had been exaggerated by lower officials. Minor theft became organized raiding. Arguments became planned aggression. Walter had not ordered every false report. He had accepted them because they confirmed what he already feared. That did not excuse him. It made the problem more human. Fear had found evidence because Walter wanted evidence. The officials responsible were arrested. The responsibility remained Walter's. He decided what to do with those reports. Meanwhile, another issue waited. Several chiefs demanded Freya secure the Eastern Alliance through marriage. Tristan refused. He told the council that a forced union would create exactly the resentment Walter claimed he wanted to prevent. That helped. It did not end the pressure. Freya faced the question alone that night. Choosing Jack did not only mean choosing a man. It meant placing a human inside the private life of the High Chieftain. Some orcs would see courage, some weaknesses, some betrayal. Was choosing Jack selfish if her people paid the political price? Then Freya remembered the horse. Jack wanted her to stay. Yet he gave her freedom to leave. Love without ownership. Could leadership work the same way? Could she serve her people without letting fear of their disappointment own every part of her? For the first time, she allowed herself to believe the answer might be yes. Back at the ranch, Jack faced a smaller problem that felt equally immediate. The bank representative arrived. Word of fire damage had reached Belcross. Reduced cattle numbers might affect Jack's payment. Jack listened. The irony nearly made him laugh. He had helped save the ruler of 9 clans. He might still lose his ranch because of 2 cows. 3 days later, a crowned wolf courier arrived, not with gold. Freya knew Jack too well. The courier carried a restitution order, property seized from Walters. Faction would repair the barn, replace cattle and compensate for damage caused by his men. No gift, no personal debt, restitution. Jack accepted. A second message carried a request. When his ribs allowed travel, Freya wanted him to come to Vargan Reach, not because she ordered it, because she wanted him there. Jack read that part twice. He waited another week. Then saddled the mare. Vagan Reach overwhelmed him before he reached the gate. Stone towers rose above the valley. White wolf banners moved across high walls. Orc guards carried weapons Jack could barely imagine lifting. Inside, almost everything was the wrong size. The first council chair left Jack's feet hanging several inches above the floor. He endured this for 15 minutes, Freya noticed. The following morning, a human-sized chair appeared beside hers, then 4 more. Jack asked why there were 5. Freya said humans might eventually arrive in groups. He suspected she enjoyed ordering carpenters around. Servants caused another problem. 3 tried to carry Jack's bag. He refused. Bridget finally explained that refusing service suggested he considered the household staff incompetent. Jack surrendered the bag. Bridget immediately handed it to a servant. Jack realized he had been defeated. The court watched him, some with curiosity, some suspicion. One elder referred to him as Freya's human guest. Freya corrected him immediately. Later, Jack asked her not to fight every insult on his behalf. Freya said he was under her protection. Jack reminded her that protection and ownership were different. Freya remembered the horse. She understood. At the next council meeting, when an elder questioned Jack directly, Freya remained silent. Jack answered for himself. The issue was grain. Human merchants claimed orc buyers took more than agreed. Orc merchants claimed humans delivered less. Several commanders wanted armed escorts. Jack asked to see the measuring baskets. Nobody understood why. He visited the border depot with Bridget and Owen. Owen was a young orc warrior with dark green skin, a square jaw, and the unmistakable expression of someone who had already decided Jack did not belong. His father had been injured in an old human border conflict. Owen did not openly insult Jack. He simply doubted him. Within 2 hours, Jack found the trade problem. Human and orc grain baskets were different sizes. Both sides used the same translated word for a full measure. Neither meant the same quantity. Worse, orc wagons were wider than the human bridge approaches, forcing grain to be transferred between carts. Every transfer caused loss. Every loss looked like theft. Jack returned with both baskets. He filled them. The difference sat on the council table. Months of hostility had partly come from a bucket. Jack proposed standardized border measures and reinforced wagon lanes. No grand speech, no politics, a practical fix. Owen watched differently afterward, not respectfully yet, but less dismissively. The dispute ended quickly. Jack became uncomfortable when people suddenly wanted his opinion on everything. He told Freya he knew fences and cattle, not kingdoms. Freya said kingdoms were often fences and cattle, surrounded by people who used longer words. Jack could not disagree. Owen challenged him several days later, not to combat, to judgment. A highland settlement needed winter preparations. Owen favored additional patrols, hunters, and meat stores. Jack focused on roofs, drainage, wells, grain sheds, and windbreaks. The discussion became a test of which approach protected the settlement better. An early storm arrived. Both plans helped. Jack's preparation prevented roof failures and frozen wells. Owen's hunters kept roads guarded. Afterward, Owen approached Jack. He offered his forearm. He admitted he still distrusted many humans. Jack said he would have been suspicious if 1 week erased a lifetime. Owen acknowledged something else. Different problems required different kinds of strength. Jack accepted that. He did not need Owen to become a different person, only fair. Owen became an ally from that point, a skeptical one, which Jack trusted more. The human side was not easier. Jack returned to Belcross for tools. A merchant refused service. Another man accused him of becoming the orc ruler's pet. Jack ignored it. Then the man called Freya an animal. Jack stopped. Before he could answer, an older farmer spoke from across the road. Freya's riders had cleared bandits from the northern trade route. Another merchant added that the new grain measures ended months of losses. A ranch woman said crowned wolf warriors recovered her brother's stolen cattle. The insulting man looked around. For once he did not have a crowd behind him. Jack barely needed to speak. That mattered more. Change did not always mean everyone became good. Sometimes cruelty simply discovered it no longer had automatic agreement. Word reached Vagan Reach before Jack returned. Freya asked what happened. Jack minimized it. Bridget did not. Later, when they were alone, Freya pressed her forehead gently to his. Jack now understood the gesture. Deep trust, gratitude, affection too serious for public display. Jack placed one hand at her waist. Freya's breathing changed. The almost kiss at the ranch had been interrupted. This one was not. Freya bent carefully. Jack met her halfway. The kiss began cautiously. Then it became warmer, still gentle. When they separated, Jack smiled. Freya asked why. He said he was remembering the first attempt that Walter's scout had interrupted. Freya said perhaps Walter had accidentally improved the timing. Jack laughed. Then he realized something. They had kissed in Vagan Reach. No hiding, no secret room, no damaged coat concealing who she was. Freya had chosen him while fully herself. That mattered. The court remained difficult. One afternoon, Jack watched Freya review hundreds of warriors. Every movement answered her voice. He stood near Bridget, feeling painfully ordinary. Jack knew cattle, water, wood, accounts. He could repair a roof. He could not command 600 armed orcs. That evening he became quiet. Freya noticed quickly. Jack admitted the fear. Not that he was simply unworthy, something more specific. He did not know whether he could belong in a world where everyone knelt to the woman he loved. At the ranch, Freya had been Freya. Here, every wall reminded Jack she was also a ruler, a symbol, a political center. What happened if one day the High Chieftain became so large that the woman from his kitchen disappeared inside the title? Freya listened, then brought him to the archive. Rows of records filled the room. She showed him rulers who had armies, perfect bloodlines, training from childhood. One caused famine because he refused to believe grain shortages were real. Another lost a fortress because pride prevented retreat. Another started a border war over an insult translated badly. Power did not guarantee wisdom. Freya told Jack she did not need another war chief. She had war chiefs. She needed someone who asked how wide the wagon was, someone who noticed a leaking roof, someone who opened irrigation gates instead of trying to become physically stronger than trained soldiers. Jack asked whether practicality counted as orc romance. Freya told him practicality became extremely attractive when everyone around her was being foolish. Jack laughed. The doubt did not disappear forever, but it stopped controlling him. Walter's trial approached. The evidence was overwhelming. Matilda's murder, manipulated raids, the ranch attack, orders to remove Freya. Walter accepted responsibility. He still insisted he had acted to prevent something worse. Several elders demanded execution. Freya had not decided. Then Walter's final order reached them. A command issued before his capture. If Freya returned with the human rancher and Jack became politically important to her, Jack was to be removed. The assassin came during the harvest gathering. Hundreds filled the lower courtyard. Music, food, human traders. Orc families. Jack stood near Owen, arguing about whether orc cattle were genuinely stronger or simply more badly behaved. Bridget saw the blade first. A stable worker moved behind Jack. Too quickly, Bridget shouted. The first strike hit her bracer. Jack turned. The second blade cut across his side. Then Freya reached the attacker. She hit him hard enough to throw him onto the stone. Her knife was at his throat before anyone else moved. The courtyard fell silent. Jack pressed one hand against his bleeding side. Freya looked at the attacker, then Jack. Fear became rage. Every lesson from childhood told her what came next. Remove the threat. Make an example. Protect weakness through strength. Her knife pressed harder. Jack called her name. Freya barely heard. He said it again. She looked toward him. Jack did not ask for mercy. He asked her not to let fear decide before the truth did. Something deeper than anger heard him. Freya slowly removed the knife. Guards seized the assassin. Interrogation revealed Walter's contingency order. The council demanded death. Walter, the assassin, anyone connected. Freya wanted the same. That night she stood alone in the war room. Jack entered with a bandage around his side. The wound was shallow. Freya still looked at it as though he had almost died. She said restraint had nearly gotten him killed. Jack told her Walter would say the same thing. Walter believed restraint was weakness. He believed future danger justified present cruelty. If Freya was now killed without process, because she feared another attempt, Walter had finally made her rule through his logic. Freya tightened both hands on the table. Jack reminded her of Matilda. Matilda taught her to listen before deciding. What strength had Matilda left, and what strength would Walter leave if his fear became stronger than hers? The question hurt. Freya looked at the maps. All her life she associated power with stopping threats. Jack had taught her something different from their first day. Having power did not require using all of it. Shelter without ownership, help without debt, strength without domination. The next morning the council gathered. Walter was brought in chains, so was the assassin. Freya announced judgment. Walter would lose rank, property, military honor, council rights. He would spend the remainder of his life under guard rebuilding roads and settlements damaged by the raids he had allowed. The assassin would receive imprisonment under clan law rather than execution. Officials who falsified reports would lose office and property and serve in reconstruction. Assets seized from Walter's network would compensate human and orc families harmed by the operations. Several elders protested. One called the ruling weak. Freya answered that punishment without law was simply fear-wearing authority. The hall fell silent. Jack stood beside her, not in front, not behind, beside. Walter looked at him. Months earlier, he had dismissed Jack Bennett as irrelevant. A poor human rancher. No soldiers, no title, no influence. Now Jack's way of seeing the world had helped shape the judgment determining Walter's remaining years. Walter lowered his head once. Not submission, recognition. Freya understood then that defeating Walter had never been the true test. The test was whether she would become him after being given enough reason to be afraid. She had chosen differently. 2 days later, Freya asked Jack to ride with her. They left Vargan Reach before dawn. No council, no procession, only Bridget following far enough behind to pretend they were alone. Jack recognized the road. They were returning to the ranch. The repaired porch waited. The pasture had begun turning green again. One blackened fence post remained beside the creek. Freya dismounted. They entered the house. The spare room door stood open. Jack had left it that way. Freya stepped inside. The bed was made. Her old clay cup remained on the shelf. She picked it up. Then she asked whether the room still had no price. Jack told her it never would. Freya turned. For all the power she carried, she looked nervous. More nervous than before battle, she explained that high-ranking orc proposals normally involved witnesses, clan gifts, public oaths, and political agreements. She wanted none of that first. She wanted the answer to begin where everything else had begun. Inside a room offered freely, Freya told Jack she wanted him beside her permanently, not as an advisor, not as a protected human, not because he saved her, as the man she chose. She wanted marriage. The directness stole Jack's breath. Freya continued. She could give him land, wealth, status, protection. But those things were not the offer. The offer was a life together. Some days at the ranch, some at Vargan Reach. Arguments, politics. Mud.orc chairs are too large for him. Human furniture is too small for her. Danger when it came, peace whenever they could find it. She would not demand that Jack abandon everything he was. She would not force him to live as an imitation orc. She wanted Jack Bennett, nothing added, nothing removed. Then she gave him the part that mattered most. He could refuse, no punishment, no debt, no consequence. Her voice weakened slightly when she said it. Jack looked around the room. Peter had once slept there. For years it represented loss. Then Freya filled it with blood, suspicion, laughter, fear, and trust. Jack reached into his pocket. He had carried the spare room key since leaving the ranch. He placed it in Freya's palm. He told her he did not want a kingdom. He did not want servants. He definitely did not want anyone kneeling to him. But he wanted her. The woman who inspected his bread for poison, and later stole from his bowl, the woman who argued with human chairs, the woman who understood war but still cried over a room offered freely, the woman who carried him through fire. Jack admitted he was afraid. Her court might never fully accept him. Some humans would call him a traitor. He would always be learning rules other people knew from childhood. But he had spent 7 years thinking the safest life was one where nobody could be taken from him. Freya had shown him the cost of that safety. Everything worth keeping. Jack told her yes. Freya stared at the key, then her face broke. Not like the first day when she had forced tears back. This time she let them come. Jack stepped closer. Freya offered her forearm. He clasped it. Then he offered his hand. She took that too. 2 customs, 1 choice. Their kiss began gently. No footsteps interrupted. No riders. No politics. Bridget remained outside and later insisted she had seen nothing. Nobody believed her. Jack and Freya married in spring. At the ranch, not the stronghold, not Belcross. The pasture where Freya nearly died had turned green. Crowned wolf banners hung from the rebuilt barn. Human lanterns lined the creek. Tristan attended. Owen stood with Bridget near the front. Some clan elders refused to come. Some human neighbors stayed home. Jack and Freya did not pretend their marriage erased generations of suspicion. That was never the promise. The promise was smaller, harder. They would choose each other without demanding either world become the other. Jack gave Freya a plain iron ring he had shaped himself. Inside he carved 1 word. Cora Freya gave Jack a narrow silver band marked with the same word, Hearth, the people one chose to protect. They clasped forearms, then hands. 2 traditions, neither erased. The ranch changed slowly afterward. Not into a palace. Jack refused that before anyone could suggest it. The roof was repaired. The porch support was finally replaced. A larger meeting house rose near the barn because human traders and orc merchants began using the ranch as neutral ground. Doorways were built high enough for Freya. Furniture came in 2 sizes. Standard grain baskets rested beside the trading tables. The wagon road was widened. Change arrived through practical problems before speeches. Jack preferred it that way. He still rose early. Checked fences. Argued about feed prices. Freya still trained before breakfast when she stayed at the ranch. She still made human diplomats nervous by being more direct than they expected. Jack remained uncomfortable with unnecessary guards. He believed 2 were enough. Freya believed 12 represented remarkable restraint. They compromised at 6. Jack considered this proof that marriage negotiations favored whoever commanded more warriors. Owen visited often. His suspicion of humans never disappeared entirely. It became something more thoughtful. He learned to distinguish old fear from current evidence. Tristan remained a close ally of Freya's rule. He and Jack eventually discovered they shared an interest in horses and a complete inability to agree about whether human saddles were better designed. Bridget remained the person most likely to insult both Jack and Freya while protecting them with absolute loyalty. Some nights, after court business ended, Freya returned to the ranch exhausted. Jack would find her standing in the spare room doorway. Not entering, just looking. He eventually asked why. Freya said that room reminded her that there was once a place where nobody knew her title and someone still believed her life was worth saving. Jack understood. He did not turn the room into anything grand. No expensive furniture, no ceremonial symbols, only a better blanket, a stronger bed, a cup on the shelf. Nearly a year after the fire, someone knocked after midnight. Rain covered the valley. Jack opened the door. A human woman stood outside, soaked through. Beside her was a young orc boy. The woman explained she had found him near an overturned wagon on the border road. His family had become separated in the storm. Searchers were still looking. The boy stood rigidly. Mud covered his green face. He was frightened and trying desperately not to show it. Then he saw Freya behind Jack. Recognition widened his eyes. He tried to kneel. Freya stopped him. Jack looked down the hallway. The spare room door was closed. For one moment he remembered Peter. Then Freya beside the burning fence. The blood. The way She had stood in the doorway and asked what shelter would cost. Jack walked down the hall. He opened the room. The rope bed remained, a clean blanket covered it. A wash basin waited. A clay cup stood on the shelf. The boy slept there that night. His family found him the following afternoon. After they left, Jack remained in the doorway. Freya came beside him. Jack said the room should stay ready, not for rulers, not for important guests, not as a shrine to grief, for anyone who came to the door needing somewhere safe. Freya slipped her hand into his. She understood. Weeks later, another traveler used the room, then a widow during a flood, then an injured courier. People slowly learned that the Bennett ranch kept one bed available. Humans or orcs did not matter. No payment was demanded. The room became known before Jack realized it had happened, not because it was beautiful, because it was free. One evening, rain tapped softly against the repaired roof. Jack sat at the kitchen table fixing a leather strap. Freya stood at the stove attempting corn cakes. The first burned, the second broke, the third looked almost respectable. Jack ate it. He told her it was good. Freya tasted the remaining half, her eyes narrowed. Jack realized marriage had finally taught him dishonesty. Freya threatened to make him cook every meal for a month. Jack considered that a reward. Later they carried 2 cups onto the porch. The pasture stretched green beneath the evening sky. One blackened fence post remained beside the creek. Freya had once asked why Jack never replaced it. He told her some scars deserved to remain visible because they marked where something survived. She rested her shoulder against him. Jack leaned into her. The size difference that once made every touch uncertain had become ordinary. Her large hand covered his. Behind them, the spare room door stood open. A clean blanket waited, an empty bed, a cup on the shelf. Freya had lived in halls filled with silver, servants, guards, and gifts worth more than Jack's ranch. Yet the poorest room she had ever entered had nearly broken her heart because it was the first gift in years that asked for nothing in return. Jack once believed that room represented everything he had lost. Freya once believed accepting shelter meant owning part of herself. Together they changed what the room meant. Not debt, not grief, not a weakness. Home, and whenever another frightened stranger eventually stood at their door wondering what safety would cost. Jack, Bennett, and Freya never needed a speech. They simply opened the room. If Freya had walked away that night, Jack's life would have stayed the same. But one act of kindness changed 2 worlds forever. If you enjoyed this emotional human-orc journey, subscribe to Orc Bond Saga and join us for more stories of love, sacrifice, and unexpected bonds.